You didn't stop suffering when someone finally loved you. You stopped when you stopped begging. This is the truth no one wants to hear, but which liberates when it penetrates the soul. Rumi said, "Do not beg for crumbs of love when the banquet is within you." But how many times have you found yourself on your knees, emotionally begging for attention, for presence, for a look that would confirm that you matter? How many times have you believed that if you insisted a little more, if you gave a little more, if you humbled yourself just one more time, this time would be different? The problem is that begging isn't love. Begging is surviving on the bare minimum, believing that minimum is all you deserve. It's accepting emotional scraps as if they were treasures. It's living in a cycle where the other person's silence becomes a punishment, and your own silence, a scream no one hears. And all the while, you bleed inside, because every time you reach out to someone who isn't willing to hold it, a piece of you is lost. Maybe you're experiencing this right now. Maybe you know all too well that feeling of waiting for a message that never comes, of writing and erasing over and over, of trying not to appear needy but inside, begging silently. It's that tightness in your chest that makes you believe that, without the other person, you are nothing. And it's precisely at this point that the soul begins to be wounded, because every unanswered request becomes an invisible scar. The truth is, no one talks about the price of begging. Begging makes you small. Begging dims the light in your eyes. Begging puts you in a place where your dignity dissolves little by little, and you don't even notice. And you know what's worse? Even though you know it hurts, you keep going, because your mind tells you it's better than emptiness. But Rumi would say, emptiness is not your enemy. It's the door. A door for what? For you to see yourself, for you to rise up, for you to understand that love isn't built by begging, it's by overflowing. When you stop begging, something changes in your energy. The wound begins to close. Silence begins to heal. You realize you no longer need to pluck crumbs from where there will never be a feast. And maybe this is the first time you're hearing this so directly. Maybe it hurts. Maybe it's uncomfortable. But there's a reason you're here now, hearing these words. There's something inside you that knows it can't continue this cycle. Something that's crying out to be set free. Something who has already understood, even if silently, that it is no longer possible to live on your knees before those who do not know or do not want to receive you. This something is your soul, asking you to stop hurting yourself by trying to hold on to what is already slipping away. It is your soul that whispers that there is a much greater love waiting to blossom, and that it begins within you. But for this truth to come alive within you, it's not enough to simply listen. You have to allow yourself to feel each word, to let them touch where no one else has touched. Because if this video reached you, it's not by chance. It's because there's a part of your story that's right here, in this moment. So, I want you to write in the comments, "I stop begging and gather my soul." Write as a commitment to yourself, as a silent declaration to the universe. Because when you record your decision, it begins to take root within you. And if this message spoke to your soul, if it brought clarity to the pain you carry, show that you're truly here. Leave your like so more people who need this healing can find this content. Subscribe to the channel to continue this journey with me, because each video I prepare is a piece of a larger mosaic of emotional and spiritual liberation, and you won't want to miss the next step on this journey. Now take a deep breath, because what comes next will make you see love and pain in a way you may never have before. You've always given of yourself. You've given more than you had. You've given everything you could, as if love were a test you had to pass to deserve to be seen. But deep down, you've never felt complete. This feeling of always being indebted to someone, of believing you need to win their attention every day, is like carrying an invisible chain tied to your chest. You waited for someone to truly see you, to see beyond words and perceive who you truly are. You waited for love to come like an embrace that never lets go, like a home where you could finally rest. But in return, you found only silence. And silence, when it's cold and empty, turns into slow torture. Perhaps deep down, you believed that true love would come when you proved your worth, when you were the perfect person, the perfect companion, the perfect support, when there was nothing that could be used against you. But what if this search was your own prison? What if, while you were trying to be enough for someone else, you were forgetting to be whole for yourself? Because the invisible problem no one tells you is that, as you mold yourself to fit someone else's heart, You begin to disappear from within. This is a pain that doesn't show in photos, that doesn't show up at gatherings with friends, but that gnaws silently. You see yourself present in every situation, yet absent from yourself. You feel like you're there, but as if you're just a shadow trying to please, trying to hold on to the little you have so as not to lose everything. And this creates a cruel cycle. The more you feel unseen, the more you try to prove you deserve to be seen. And the more you try, the more you lose yourself. You start to live waiting for signs. A late-night text, an unexpected call, a gesture that tells you you matter. And when it doesn't happen, your mind makes excuses for the other person. He's busy. He's not good at showing it. Maybe I'm exaggerating. And little by little, this adaptation to the smallest detail shapes your identity. You start to think that's what love is all about. Enduring, waiting, understanding too much. But the truth is that this silent acceptance of absence is what fuels the wound. Because deep down, it's not the lack of love that hurts the most. It's the lack of reciprocity. It's knowing you're always there, but the other person is never completely there for you. It's the feeling of constantly offering an emotional feast and receiving only crumbs in return. And the cruelest thing is that the more you get used to these crumbs, the harder it becomes to realize you're starving inside. This isn't just a relationship issue, it's a matter of identity. Because when you live like this for too long, you start to believe this is the love you deserve. You start to feel small compared to those who don't even realize the magnitude of your gesture. You start to think that being a priority is asking too much, when in fact, it's the bare minimum. And here's what hurts the most. You start to keep quiet, to avoid bothering, to avoid appearing needy, to avoid pushing others further away. But every silence you swallow is a piece of yourself you're leaving behind. This is the invisible prison, a jail built not by iron bars but by expectations and fear of loss. You become hostage to your own need to be loved, and so you accept any sign of affection as if it were gold. But true love doesn't bring you to your knees begging. It lifts you up. It makes you feel like you can breathe. It doesn't leave you in the dark, wondering if you still matter. Perhaps now, as you listen to this, you're remembering times when you waited for an answer that never came. Times when you tried so hard to be noticed and still felt like you failed. And perhaps you're realizing that this constant search for validation from others comes at a very high cost. The loss of your own essence. I want you to remember one sentence today. Just one. And if it speaks to your soul, write it in the comments as a way to get out what's been bottled up inside for too long. I deserve to be seen in my entirety. Because when you recognize this, you begin to see that this prison is not eternal, and that the keys have always been closer than you imagine. You weren't just suffering from the absence of the other person. That absence, painful as it was, wasn't what hurt you most. The deepest wound lay in the fact that your soul had fallen on its knees before someone who didn't know, couldn't, or simply didn't want to receive you. This silent, often unconscious gesture of giving yourself completely to someone who doesn't have room to welcome you is like offering your own heart and watching it be left on the table without anyone realizing the value of what you've just received. Rumi said, "You have to let go of what doesn't want to stay so that life can come in." But how do you let go when you believed that person was the answer? How do you let go of something that seemed like the only source of love, even though that source had long since dried up? The truth is, begging is holding on to what's already gone, and this not only ties you to the past, but also cuts you a little deeper each day. It's an invisible but constant cut that takes away your strength, your dignity, and your clarity about who you truly are. What really hurts is realizing that it's not just physical absence that hurts. It's the internal, almost automatic act of lowering yourself to try to fit into the limited space the other person offers. It's thinking that if you shrink a little more, if you talk a little less, if you demand almost nothing, you might be able to stay. But this is a cruel illusion, because true love doesn't require you to diminish yourself to exist. The deepest thing about this spiritual root is that it feeds not only on the present moment, but on your entire emotional history. Often the soul kneels because it learned from a very young age that to be loved, you must deserve it, earn it, prove it. Perhaps at some point in your life you were taught subtly or explicitly that love was not a right, but a reward for good behavior, obedience, or extreme effort. And this silent belief continues to guide your relationships like an invisible script. When Rumi talks about letting go of what doesn't want to stay, he's not just telling you to walk away from someone who doesn't love you. He's inviting you to an inner liberation. Because as you continue to hold on to what's already gone in someone else's heart, you close the doors to what could truly fulfill you. It's like holding a handful of ashes, afraid of losing what little remains, without realizing that by opening your hands, you could receive something alive and whole. Begging is a form of resistance, and all resistance, when prolonged, turns into chronic suffering. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. The more you hold it, the faster it slips through your fingers, and in the process, you forget to notice that there's a whole river running alongside, ready to fill you up again. The problem is that this kneeling position, emotionally speaking, shapes the way you see yourself. You begin to believe you're too small to receive something great, too imperfect to be loved effortlessly, and this belief becomes a distorted mirror where you only see your flaws and never your worth. This is where spiritual pain sets in, because it's no longer just connected to the other person, but to your own relationship with yourself. A wounded soul, when it doesn't understand this dynamic, becomes accustomed to the idea that love is synonymous with struggle, resistance, and constant trials. But Rumi also said, "What you seek is seeking you," and that changes everything. Because if true love is also seeking you, it doesn't require you to beg. It doesn't bring you to your knees to be earned. It finds you standing whole, ready to be recognized. Perhaps you're realizing now that this spiritual root of your pain isn't a punishment, but an invitation to rise. That every time you humbled yourself for love was actually a silent cry from your soul telling you that you deserved more, that you didn't need to hold on to what was already leaving because what's yours doesn't need to be held onto in fear. It remains because it belongs. Before we continue, I want you to write in the comments a sentence that will mark the beginning of this change. I rise from that which does not receive me. Write as if you were speaking to yourself, as if you were making an intimate promise. Because when you declare this, you begin to break the pattern that keeps you trapped in pain, and take the first step toward finally allowing life to enter. What no one told you is that stopping begging isn't the same as losing. Society, the relationships you've had, and even the stories you've heard since childhood have led you to believe that giving up something or someone is synonymous with failure, that stopping fighting is giving up, but it isn't. Stopping begging is actually starting to see yourself. It's finally taking your eyes off those who don't offer you reciprocity and focusing them on yourself, as if you were looking at someone forgotten in the corner, waiting to be remembered. It's realizing that while you were giving yourself until you bled, there was a piece of you begging you to choose yourself. When you stand up and gather your soul, something changes silently but profoundly. That wound that seemed eternal, which reopened every time the other person didn't respond or wasn't present, begins to heal. Not because the past has been erased, but because you've stopped feeding the pain with your own energy. It's as if you've finally closed the door through which all your worth was escaping and, in its place, lit an inner light that begins to warm you from the inside out. The absence of the other person ceases to be the center. You no longer wake up counting how many hours have passed since your last message. You no longer spend the day trying to interpret every gesture, every word, or every silence. Because silence ceases to be a hole that needs to be filled by the other person, and becomes a space where you hear yourself. The same silence that once tortured you now begins to heal. It transforms into a sanctuary where you can hear your own thoughts without the echo of rejection. The hidden key to this transformation isn't hardening your heart or pretending you don't care. It's not becoming cold, indifferent, or unapproachable. It's actually allowing yourself to feel everything, but not imprisoning yourself in what hurts. It's understanding that love isn't synonymous with persistence. True love doesn't need to be earned every day with sacrifices that cost you your peace. It flows, it sustains, it breathes with you. This key lies in choosing to harness the energy previously spent trying to fit into someone else's expectations and invest it in nourishing yourself. It's recognizing that every time you beg, you're not just addressing the other person, but also your own wound, asking it to remain open. When you decide to stop, it's as if you're saying to yourself, I no longer need to bleed to prove I'm worthy of love. And it's in that moment that healing begins, not as a sudden miracle, but as a daily construction of self-respect. Healing isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of awareness. It's being so connected to yourself that the outside world loses its power to define your worth. It's being able to look back at everything you've accepted and realize that true change began the day you prioritized yourself. This is the moment you discover that self-love isn't a distant concept or a pretty phrase, but a practice that renews itself with every choice you make to protect and honor yourself. When the hidden key clicks, you realize you no longer need to convince anyone to stay. You don't need to prove what's already true, because the love you sought has always been waiting in the most obvious and yet most neglected place, within you. The great revelation is that what you call loss is actually liberation. The person who leaves may take their physical presence, but what they leave is space. Space for you to grow, for you to breathe, for you to rebuild yourself away from the emotional chains that kept you trapped. And perhaps this is the hardest part to accept. The absence of another is not a void to be feared, but a fertile ground for planting something new. You begin to realize that each moment of silence is, in fact, an invitation to delve deeper into yourself. And when you dive in, you find parts of yourself that were erased, suffocated by the effort of holding on to what already wanted to go. That's when life begins to enter, as Rumi said. Because you've made space, because you've stopped filling your heart with what no longer fits. I want you to hold on to a phrase right now, and if it resonates with you, write it in the comments as a silent but powerful commitment. I gather my soul and become whole. Because when you write, you're not just responding to this video. You're recording within yourself the decision not to kneel again where there's no room for you. And that decision is the true key that will unlock the door to everything that's to come. Maybe you spent entire nights staring at your phone screen, waiting for that notification that never arrived. The clock struck the wee hours of the morning, but your body couldn't rest. Your mind created conversations that never happened, imagined responses that were never written. You wondered what you'd done wrong, mentally reliving every conversation, every detail, trying to pinpoint the exact point where their interest faded. And deep down, you knew it wasn't about something you did, but about something they were never willing to give. Maybe you wrote long messages, pouring out every bit of feeling you held, only to delete them seconds later, afraid of seeming needy, afraid of pushing him further away. You typed, reread, deleted. You held the words close to your chest like someone holding back a scream, because deep down his silence was already an answer. But accepting that answer seemed impossible, as if admitting that his absence was permanent was the same as giving up a part of yourself. And then one day you simply didn't write. Not because you'd stopped loving, not because you'd stopped feeling, but because something inside you awakened. You realized you no longer needed to bleed to be whole, that you didn't need to keep offering what was already being silently rejected. That day didn't arrive with fanfare. There was no dramatic moment. It was just an ordinary morning when you opened your eyes and felt you no longer wanted to put yourself in that position. An almost invisible decision, but one that changed everything. What happens at this moment is that you begin to free yourself from the need for external validation. You stop relying on the presence or absence of others to measure your own worth, and without realizing it, the energy that was previously directed outward begins to turn inward. You begin to listen to yourself again. You begin to remember things you enjoyed doing before trying to be everything to someone else. You begin to feel like you can breathe without being tied to someone else's rhythm. This process isn't easy. In the early days, it may feel strange. You feel the absence, the silence, the space where once there was expectation. But little by little, this space stops hurting and becomes a refuge. It's there that you begin to rebuild yourself, that you begin to realize that your life doesn't have to revolve around someone who never knew how to welcome you fully. It's there that you understand that love isn't synonymous with endless waiting, nor with daily tests of worthiness. And the most surprising thing is that when you stop insisting, you begin to see more clearly what was previously hidden. The small crumbs you accepted as a feast, the moments when you were content with half a presence, the looks that said more than words. You realize that for a long time you called love something that was, in fact, emotional survival. This awakening may happen silently, but it is profound. It marks the beginning of a new way of relating, not only to others, but especially to yourself. Because when you understand that you don't need to beg to be loved, you discover that the most important love is the one that arises within you and endures, even when everything around you seems empty. And if you've ever experienced or are experiencing this moment of not writing, of not insisting, of simply letting go, I want you to use this video to transform this moment into a milestone. Write a sentence in the comments that describes this turning point. I let go of what holds me back and return to myself. Because when you put it into words, you begin to commit to never putting yourself back in the place where you had to bleed to feel like you existed. And that commitment is the foundation for everything that follows. You are not what you lost. No matter how much your mind tries to convince you of this, no matter how much memories insist on bringing back the face, voice, and gestures of the one who left, the truth is that you are not limited to the absence of anyone. You are the one who survived the emptiness, who made it through long nights and heavy days without begging for crumbs, even when your entire body begged you to go back and seek any sign of their presence. This strength, which you often don't even realize, is proof that within you lies something greater than the pain you experienced. Rumi said, "When the soul is full, the world is no longer necessary." And that's the key to this shift in consciousness, because when your soul begins to fill itself, you no longer depend on scraps to survive. You no longer wait for others to fill the space that once seemed like an endless hole. You discover that this space can be filled by you, by your own presence, by your own care. And when that happens, the pain no longer hurts you in the same way, because there's no longer a heart pleading. This change isn't something that happens overnight. It's a process, often silent, that begins the moment you choose to stand up. It's when you realize that no matter how much you've loved, no matter how hard you've tried, your life can't continue to be an altar where only one side offers. It's when you begin to understand that you no longer need to justify the other person's absence, nor make excuses to keep alive something that said goodbye to you long ago. A shift in consciousness is the moment you realize that the love you've always wanted to receive is exactly the love you need to learn to give yourself. It's not an arrogant love. It's not putting yourself above everyone else. It's a silent and consistent love, one that doesn't falter on bad days and doesn't need approval to exist. It's looking in the mirror and seeing someone who resisted, who didn't completely lose themselves even when it seemed like everything was falling apart. And the most liberating thing is realizing that, contrary to what you believed, it's not the other person's absence that hurts you now. It's the memory of how you left yourself aside for so long. It's understanding that true abandonment wasn't what the other person did to you, but what you did to yourself in an attempt to keep them around. And this awareness, however painful it may seem at first, is also the point where true healing begins. You begin to see that you no longer need to put yourself in the role of the one who waits, the one who begs, the one who accepts anything to avoid being alone. Because you've never been alone. Your own company was there all along, just waiting for you to recognize it as enough. And when that happens, the weight you carried begins to dissolve. Silence, once unbearable, becomes an ally. It becomes a space where you can breathe, reflect, and grow stronger. Rumi spoke of the abundance that exists when the soul is full, and this abundance doesn't mean you no longer need anyone or that you'll live in isolation. It means you relate from a different place where love isn't born of need but of choice. You begin to share instead of begging. You give because you want to, not because you fear loss. This shift in consciousness also changes the way you view the past. Instead of seeing it as a sequence of losses, you begin to see it as a set of trials overcome. Each moment of pain becomes a stepping stone that brought you here. And when you understand this, what once seemed like weakness reveals itself as courage. Because it took courage to move on, when everything inside you was begging you to go back. Now perhaps you're remembering all the times you believed you couldn't make it, all the nights you thought there was no way out. And yet, you've made it this far. This is your living proof. This is what shows you're not the one who lost, but the one who survived. And surviving is just the beginning, because now is the time to live from a new place. If these words made sense to you, if they somehow touched that silent part of you that already knew this truth, I want you to write in the comments, "My soul is full of me." This phrase isn't just a comment, it's a declaration, a way of telling yourself that from now on you will no longer kneel before what doesn't receive you, because you've discovered that the love you've always sought is already within you. If you've made it this far to the last second of this video, it's because something inside you recognized every word. It's because somehow this message found its way to your soul. And so, I want to ask you for two things that will further strengthen this journey we're on together. First, subscribe to the channel to continue receiving content that speaks directly to your essence, your strength, and your healing. Each new video is another step on this journey of reconnecting with who you truly are. And since you've made it to the end, please leave a like. Not just as a gesture, but as a way to let people know this message was valuable to you. This will help it reach more people who also need to hear what you've shared today. Now there's a next video appearing here on the screen. It's a natural continuation of this conversation, and will further delve into what you've begun to feel today. Click and stay with me because the journey isn't about who stays, it's about who you become when you decide to stop begging.